Podcasting from the beautiful state of Maine, welcome to another episode of the Learning from Leaders podcast, the show that focuses on identifying and developing the skills and behaviors that will inspire, empower, and compel others to follow your lead. Listen as Patrick's guests talk about the powerful leadership approaches they have identified and developed, which are vital for leading in today's challenging times. These are the same approaches that will positively impact you as a leader too. Learning from Leaders provides the right balance of leadership research with real-world scenarios, making it easy for you to rise above your best. All right, let's start the show.
Hey everybody, I'm Patrick Barano. Thank you for joining me on another episode of Learning from Leaders. And on today's episode, we're going to learn what it's like to live life in crescendo. And we're going to do that with the co-author of the book, Cynthia Covey Holler, who co-wrote this book with her late father, Stephen R. Covey, who's best known for his best-selling book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. This book, I think, in this environment provides so much value. As I mentioned in one of the posts that I did, I believe as though this book has been treasure sitting on the ocean floor for a decade since her father's death and has now been raised to the surface for us all to be able to really enjoy and appreciate all that it has to offer. So I hope you enjoy this. Let's get into it. Cynthia, I want to thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I thoroughly enjoyed reading Live Life in Crescendo. And I was so excited to have an opportunity to read this in advance. I told you, to me, it was like finding treasure at the bottom of the sea, and I'll talk about that later. But you speak about really being a steward, I think, for your dad and finishing this book. I was wondering if you could give a little background in terms of how did this come about, this book initially?
Thank you so much for having me, Patrick. I've looked forward to being on your show. Appreciate it. And I love the hidden treasure analogy. I hope that's what it is. This happened many years ago. My father and I were just discussing a lot of different projects he was doing. And I foolishly said to him, "Hey, Dad, you ever going to write anything as good as 7 Habits?" And he was just like, "What?" He just acted insulted. Like, "Are you serious?" He said, "Why do I get up every day to speak and write? Am I just one and done? Everything that I have contained in the 7 Habits and I've got nothing else to contribute?" And obviously, that wasn't the case. He went on to write a lot of other books, but it really was insightful to me that he thought, yeah, I still have important contributions ahead to make. At that point, he asked me, he said, "Because you asked this question, now you can help me." I had a lot of interest in his mission statement the last 10 years of his life, which was live life in crescendo. He said, "Why don't you interview me and you do all the legwork?" He wanted this book to be chock full of stories, examples that were inspiring of famous and non-famous people, that hopefully people could see themselves in it and could say, maybe I could do that, or I like what that person did. And so he wanted me to take that assignment to basically write the book and take his ideas and go with it. We worked on it a few years together. And then, unfortunately, he passed away unexpectedly. I write about that journey of our family kind of in the back of the book, as some personal things that we shared. Anyway, I felt like I have to take up the baton and finish it. It's been 10 years. And Patrick, I've had to live in crescendo to finish the book. It was a rough road and some setbacks. And my goal was to be his faithful translator of the vision that he had for this important message. Live life in crescendo. Your most important work is always ahead of you.
So it's been about 10 years since he passed. What was that like when that first happened in terms of this book and finishing it?
He would always call me and say, "How's the book coming? You working on the book?" And I was collecting stories and I was quotes and doing what I could. But I'm a mother of 6 children. I have 21 grandkids, which keeps me busy. And I was involved in the community and a lot of different positions and things I was doing. And so I couldn't get to it how he wanted me to. I felt really bad when he passed away and we hadn't finished it. But I'd made a commitment that I would finish it and get this out. And as a family, we kind of recognize this, Patrick, as his last big idea, his last lecture, so to speak, that something that he wanted to share that was very personal to him, that he felt could really impact people and bring out their best potential.
Was there a period of time before you picked this up again in terms of finishing this project, or has it been one that you've sort of slowly been putting together over the last 10 years?
We talked in 2008. That's when it first started. And since then, I've been picking away at it. I'm a slow writer. It took a long time. I wrote it in his voice, which is kind of unusual. I went back and forth deciding, do I put Cynthia and then Stephen? And I never really liked books like that. So he asked me to write it, and I wrote it in his voice because it's his ideas. And it was his last big message he wanted to share. I just provided the stories and commentary.
Yeah, and the stories are so rich all the way through it. They do such a great job of sort of bringing out the ideas here. One of the things that I love that you mentioned here is that it was both famous, well-known people as well as people that were not well-known. And I think that speaks to the belief that everybody is capable of this.
Everybody has greatness in them. And that was my father's whole goal of his life. And he spoke about life as a mission, not a career. And his mission, he felt, was to unleash human potential. I think he did that through his speaking and his books and writings. And this was the last one that he felt strongly about. I felt a sacred stewardship to finish this. It's drawn us closer too. I'm close to him when I'm doing it. I can hear him say, hurry and finish it already. Get it out there.
I bet. And as you mentioned, I posted on this about a week ago, because as I was finishing this again and knowing that this had been such a period of time since it was going to be revealed to everybody, that's how I thought of this, was that this thing had sort of sunk to the bottom of the ocean, but you knew it was there. And it was just a matter of time before this treasure was going to get raised up. And now it's coming to that point where it's available for everybody to view. And I feel so fortunate almost to be able to have a preview of it, of what's in here.
Thank you. I love that analogy. I can see what you're saying. I think it is something that's been saved. And hopefully people that have been inspired by my father's books through the years will be excited, like, oh, there's one last big idea here that hopefully will help me in my life.
I would agree. One of the things that I noticed right in the very beginning of the book, it talks about a four-square person. And he mentioned, or you mentioned writing for him, right? Mental, physical, social, and spiritual. How important was that?
That was huge to him. When we would have birthdays, his compliment would be, you're a four-square person. You are successful in all those four areas, physically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally. Those were the four areas that he would emphasize that you have to be balanced in so that you could have a full life. And if one was out of whack, it kind of would disturb them all. My father wasn't perfect at all, but he tried more than anyone I know to live what he taught. And he sincerely tried to become a four-square person and be balanced in those four areas, which are fundamental to everyone.
I loved that four-square analogy. Now, the book is broken up into these four stages: midlife, pinnacle of success, life-changing setbacks, and then
second half of life.
Second half of life.
When you get older, what are you going to do? What are you going to choose?
What I found interesting as I was reading that was, at first I was thinking, oh, well, this is a book for people that get to their 40s, and it's not. It's really a book for anybody at any age, because I think even if you're not at that midlife stage, it provides such a roadmap.
It's not something to save until you're old. It came about because of that in the first place, because my father kept getting asked, hey, Steve, you're getting up there. You're going to keep writing and speaking and doing all this. And he couldn't believe it. He said, well, of course, I still have passion for what I'm doing. I feel I have a purpose. I want to contribute. In our word, the retirement was the R word. You didn't say it. It was a bad word. If you might retire from a job or a career, but you never retire from making meaningful contributions. And so just to give your listeners a little background, it mostly talks about the crescendo mentality. And my father chose to use a musical analogy, which I really like. As you know, in music, crescendo, when you're going to a concert, you feel a crescendo coming. It grows in power and strength and energy. And it's just incredible how it comes to a crescendo. It keeps expanding, where the opposite side, diminuendo, slows and lessens in energy and power and eventually comes to a complete stop. And so the challenge that he gives throughout this book is, in any age or stage of life, like you're talking about, you've got to consciously choose to live in crescendo, to increase in contribution and influence and growing and learning rather than the opposite.
Something along those lines in the book, there was a part that reads, choose the right yardstick.
Right. That was Clayton Christensen, one of my father's friends, that talked about that society measures success so differently, doesn't it, than what he believes true success really is. They measure it by notoriety and wealth and influence, power, prominence, where he would call that secondary greatness. Primary greatness is your character and to be successful in your most important roles in life, that of a father or a mother, a parent, a son or daughter, a sibling, a community volunteer, a humanitarian, a leader. Those are all important roles. And he's defining success as being successful in those roles rather than in the ones that society celebrates.
As you look over these 4 stages, is there one that resonated more with you as you were going through of maybe examples that you saw growing up?
Well, I could give you just a personal example that I was magnified in my life. I tell at the beginning of the book about a magical time that I had with my father going on a trip to San Francisco. And I was 12 years old, and I'm the oldest of 9. And I was chosen to go on this trip with him when he was speaking. And we made a plan, and half of the fun was planning it a couple months ahead, and we'd go over it quite often. Every other day, we'd talk about our plans. And to a young 12-year-old, this was going to be amazing. We would go and stay in this fancy hotel. My dad would speak all day while I would just swim and relax and play around there. And then I would meet him at the back of the room, and we would take off before people grabbed him and go ride the trolley cars. I mean, to think of going on the trolley cars in San Francisco was just incredible. And we'd ride those, and then we'd go over to some of the fancy stores that they had in San Francisco, and I could buy a few school clothes. Then we were going to go to Chinatown and have some authentic Chinese food. It's our favorite. Both of us love Chinese food. And then we'd take a taxi back to the hotel, and before it closed, and even if it did close, my dad had ways of getting in to swim before they shut it up. And he would go under the little barrier, and we'd swim real quick before we got kicked out. And then we'd go up to the hotel room and have hot fudge sundae and watch a show. That was the plan. We were so excited about it. And it was going according to that plan. I was in the back of the room, and my father was making his way toward me when all of a sudden one of his best friends greeted him that had moved away, and they embraced and were so excited to see each other. And I heard the friend say, "Oh, I'm so happy. I knew you were speaking today. I came to invite you to come with my wife and I, and we'll go eat down on the wharf and catch up." And my father said, Bob, that sounds great. And I saw my trolley car go down the hill without me. And I thought, oh, I'm going to be stuck with 2 old people the rest of the night. What happened to our magical date? And then he said, "I'd love to do that, Bob, but not tonight. My daughter, Cynthia, and I have a special date planned. Don't we, honey?" And he gave me a wink and grabbed my hand, and we were out the door before Bob knew what happened. It really took me back. And I said, "But Dad, this is your good friend. Don't you want to spend time with him tonight?" And he said, "Oh, no, I wouldn't miss this for anything. Let's go catch that trolley car." We went off, and in a young girl's life, that modeled to me so many things that he taught. Deep trust in our relationship, putting priorities, putting me ahead of somebody else who was also important to him, but believing that this promise that we'd had together to do this would come about. And first things first, I just learned so many. It was kind of a foundation for our relationship, looking back on my childhood. And he tried to model what he taught. And this was an example that really meant a lot to me.
I loved hearing that or reading about that story, because I'm reading along, you're thinking, oh no, I hope this doesn't, you don't miss out on that opportunity. Yeah. But it speaks to, from a leadership standpoint, I will often talk about one of the first behaviors I think you need is congruence, alignment. It demonstrated that alignment of what your dad was saying and what he was actually going to do were the same thing. It was an alignment. Yeah. That's so important.
He tried to live that. And I guess that's our challenge to all of us. We all know more than we do, don't we? We all believe and we have deep values, and sometimes we don't act on them. And that was a reminder to me that you have to be congruent. You can't have disparity in one part of your life and then the other speak about something else.
Another thing that I teased out as I was reading was the concept in there of faith plus work equals fruit. I was wondering if you could elaborate on that in your own experiences.
My parents were united in teaching us good values, but letting us also make choices too. We were taught to take responsibility for ourselves, but to also carry that belief that they had in us of our potential, that we were affirmed a lot. And I think I talk a little bit about that in the book, that if you look around you, who around you needs affirmation? We all can point to someone who believed in us when maybe we didn't believe in ourselves. If you ask people to identify that person, most people can think of someone. What about us? What about we look around? Who is in need of a mentor or someone to believe in us? My father defined leadership as communicating another's worth and potential so clearly that they are inspired to see it in themselves. That's what a true leader does. And we have that opportunity every day with those that we mentor and those that are around us. Maybe one of our children is going through a hard divorce and needs our support and our belief that she or he still has great worth and potential. Maybe there's grandkids that are suffering. Maybe a business, someone in business who you work with in the workplace has been shot down with a lot of ideas that were presented to a boss and it wasn't well received and are discouraged. And we have a chance to build that person and to bring out to believe in them when maybe they don't believe in themselves.
John Wooden is mentioned in the book as being a pretty big influence on your dad. And there's a great story in there that you tell about that.
John Wooden of course, he was the greatest coach. He was named as one of the greatest coaches ever. But yet the last third of his life, he had his most important work that he believed was his most important work, which was mentoring. He spent the first 2/3 as a coach, but he said basketball is not everything. It's not the most important thing. To teach and to mentor, that's the highest priority. What an influence he had up until in his 90s. He wrote over a dozen books. He spoke so many times during the year in his 80s and 90s after his beloved wife died. He was a great example of being a mentor and blessing people's lives through just believing in them. I love this quote by Tom Peters that says, "Leaders don't create followers, they create more leaders." And that's the whole goal, is to create other leaders.
Along those lines, you talk about resourcefulness and initiative.
My dad used to call it R&I, and it was funny growing up. We were never allowed to make excuses for ourselves. We would come home and say, "Oh, I hate my teacher. My math teacher's the worst. Use your R&I." And you're like, "Oh, well, he really is a bad teacher, Dad. He doesn't help us. He doesn't know how to explain." I would give our excuses. And he's like, "What does that have to do with anything? Use your R&I and make it happen." Which just meant it's up to you. You got to do extra work. You got to try to switch your class, get in another class if you have to, get some extra help. We had a good balance because my mom would let us blame other people. We could say to my mom, "I've got the worst teacher." "Oh my gosh, that's just terrible. Let me see. We got to do something about that. This guy's got to help you more." When we wanted our heart's massages, we'd go to her. But if we wanted the truth and to take responsibility, then we would go to my dad and he would just say, "Work it out." That principle applies in the Crescendo Mentality. I'm just thinking of a great example. If you don't mind me sharing one, you asked earlier, which area did you really like? I liked all of them. I think it's powerful. But I think in the life-changing setbacks and the life experiences, that's when you really show if you're the choice of choosing to live in crescendo or diminuendo. So I'm thinking of one of my favorite stories in the book that really inspired me is by a man named Ray Hitton that lived in Alabama and was literally framed for 2 murders in his small town. They couldn't find who murdered these people. Ray was in a lockdown facility at work himself, 15 miles away when they were committed. But somehow he was charged. He was basically racial profiled and charged with these crimes and sent to jail. He believed that he was innocent. He knew he was innocent and he was a very good person. And he trusted in the legal system. But the next thing he knew, he found himself convicted of both those murders and on death row. And so he is devastated. His life is plummeting and he is despondent. And he goes into his cell and he throws his Bible under his bed and he decides to literally shut down. He's so insulted to be charged with this and so full of despair that this happened to him. And so for 3 long, miserable years, he doesn't speak to anybody, nobody around him in his nearby cells, the guards. He shuts down. He speaks only to his family and friends who visit him once a week. And he's living in diminuendo. He has no influence, no power, no options as far as he can see. One night at 2 a.m, he hears his fellow cellmate next to him just crying in pain and calling out for someone to please help him. And something awakens in Ray that was always there. This compassion came forward and he realized, he said, it's just rocked me that I'm a prisoner on death row. I can't do anything about that. But he said, I had other choices. I didn't realize despair and hate were choices, but so was love and compassion. And so he breaks his 3 years of silence and finds out what's wrong with this prisoner. And he found out that his mother had just passed away, and he was devastated and couldn't go on. And so Ray spends the night comforting and talking to this stranger about his mother, and even laughing and talking about great experiences that they had together, and giving this prisoner hope that to go on. And so from then on, he switched from living in diminuendo to consciously exercising his circle of influence around him and choosing to live in crescendo by being a light and a beacon to his fellow prisoners, and even to the guards who sometimes came to him for advice. For the next 28 years, I mean, he's in there so long that he finally draws the attention of Brian Stevenson, who worked for Equal Justice Initiative. You might have heard of the Just Mercy film and that book. And he takes his case and realizes he is convicted wrongly. And he takes it before the Supreme Court after a long battle and finally is released. And Ray comes out of the prison after almost 30 years and says to his family and friends, the sun does shine. And from that, 4 years later, that's the title of his new book that tells of this journey from despair into hope and belief that life can get good again. It becomes a New York Times bestselling book. And Ray Hinton, who was once on death row and had no circle of influence, no power, and no ability, through all these years, he has expanded that. He was a light and a beacon to them. Now he is an advocate, a speaker, an author, and his life, like the subtitle of this book, your most important work is always ahead of you. His life has expanded, and he is doing incredible work for other people that are unjustly imprisoned. I thought that was so inspiring that he realized I can't control being on death row, but I can choose how to respond to what's happened to me, and I still have choices.
It's such a great story. And there's something that, as I was hearing you talk about that, there was another point in the book where one of the bullets says, believe in and give second chances. It's not just believe in second chances, but also that we have to give.
Yeah.
We always want a second chance, but it's much harder for us to give it.
And when we all need second chances, Brian Stevenson said, we're all better than the worst thing we've ever done. We can think of, we are better than that. So second chances, it talks a lot in this book that we do need to give them as well as receive them. Many of your listeners may have bought Dave's Killer Bread, which is an awesome, healthy bread. And this came about from a man that went to prison 3 times in a row. It was spent more than 15 years in prison and was given a second chance by his family when he got out to join the family bakery, and eventually invented this great bread that's all across the United States and everywhere. But he hires people that have been convicted of felonies and that can't get a job because of their records. He gives them a second chance because his brother gave one to him. I buy his bread for that reason, besides it being delicious. But, we all are better than our worst thing we've ever done. We all need another chance to reinvent ourselves and to start over.
I will say, of all of the parts, the life-changing setback is the area that resonated with me the most. And I think I go back to, I lost both of my parents about 1.5 years apart when I was a teenager to cancer. And I remember that. And those are the things that, in hindsight, I think have made me the strongest, is going through those. And not that I would ever want to go through them again like that, but I know looking back, that's really where our power oftentimes comes from.
That's true. C.S. Lewis said, hardships prepare ordinary people for extraordinary destinies. And it's true. I mean, the resilience and what you had to draw from losing, I can't imagine that as a teenager, losing both your parents that closely together, what you learned from that and what you've gained or what you went through. How powerful is that in your life today? Even though, like you say, you would never choose that, but maybe you're able to have more compassion for orphans and for people that don't have a great lifestyle, don't have a good family, and you're able to do a lot of good for them because of what you suffered and went through. Without question. And we talked about this earlier, is that we both come from large families. Yeah. I'm one of 10. There was a lot of benefit to that in terms of support in our family going through that. I can't imagine with 10 children and to lose your parents. I'm sure the older ones had to step up and be the guardians and become parents to some of you younger ones.
we had a good bond. Our parents left a good legacy for us.
Look what you've done with that. That's incredible what work you're doing today.
Thank you. The way the book is structured overall, Cynthia, and I mentioned this to you earlier, is that I love the stories. And then after the stories or woven into them, there's generally a quote that I really think adds a different perspective and just helps to sort of build on it. And, one that stuck out to me, and along this line around life challenges, it was by Goethe, and it said, "Only by joy and sorrows does a person know anything about themselves and their destiny."
We are learning as we go through every age and stage of life. Like you said, the crescendo mentality applies in every time that we're at, because we always have to, whatever stage we're at, we have to decide, am I going to choose to live in crescendo, or am I going to give in and live in diminuendo? What influence will I have? We talked earlier about quietly quitting, that if in this workplace, in this environment now, there's people that are quietly quitting, which means they may not left their job, but in a sense, emotionally and physically, they have left it because they don't feel appreciated. Maybe they feel stagnant. As you mentioned, maybe they don't believe in themselves. They need somebody to believe in them. And because of that, they've quietly quit contributing to their company or to the business and the people around them. What a message to those people who may be in the midlife right there, who may be going through the quietly quitting stage, to realize I have choices that I can make. I can't control if I like my boss. I can't control if I'm micromanaged or if I don't feel like I'm appreciated and paid what I'm worth. But I can control my circle of influence. I can increase in contributing to those around me and those that I have influence with. And pretty soon, little by little, that grows and expands and could change your entire office and the entire business.
It's that R&I again.
R&I. Take your R&I. You don't want to hear it, but take R&I. And he would always say, make it happen. No excuses. Make it happen. That's not always a popular message today. The other option is what? We know what it's like to live in diminuendo in the workplace. So we've seen it in the workplace and at home and different venues. And there's no growth. There's no learning and no potential. As we're talking about that sometimes you need someone who believes in you. And we need to be a light and beacon to those around us to believe in them. And that can spread.
I will say what I really appreciated toward the end of this book, Cynthia, because there might be some people that are like, that's easy for you to say, Cynthia, right? You're part of the Coveys. Things are always great. And it's easy to do this, to be in crescendo. But there's a vulnerability here at the end where you talk about things that haven't always been great and they weren't always great for your dad. And I think that's such an important point here, and it brings so much trust, I think, to the reader as they're going through it. They're realizing you went through challenges as well.
I chose to share some personal things about our family for that very reason. Everybody, you look at other people and we compare ourselves to others all the time, and we shouldn't, because the definition of success is you're successful in your most important roles without comparison to others. But it's a natural tendency to do that, to think they have it all and they've got it all together and everything's perfect with that family. I'm the one that's got problems in ours. Every family struggles. Every family has things that they deal with. Some are evident and seen, and others are behind the scenes. But with our family, I chose to show that we have a journey of living in crescendo and had to practice it in 3 examples in the book. And the first one was my mom, who had 9 children, and maybe that's what did her body in. But she had back surgery and it didn't go well. She was in the hospital for 4 months. And then when she was released, she was in a wheelchair. And this was my mom was the Energizer bunny. She never stopped. And for her to have to deal with being in a wheelchair and have people helping her get up and down and having that disruption in our family, always having someone there. And what our family had to deal with when we wanted our mom to be a normal person, and she was consumed with her health problems for a time. And we had to choose to rally together to support her. And she had to choose, I can't help that I'm in a wheelchair, but I have other choices. I can still be a mother and a matriarch. I can still be an example in my community. I can still raise money for this Covey Center for the Arts that she did and bring that about. I can still have influence, even though I can't choose that I'm in a wheelchair the rest of my life. And so that was one instant where, like you, Patrick, we as 9 kids had to come together and support each other and help our mom And then at the same time, the next thing that happened is we noticed our father was not normal, was not the same. And this is something that isn't generally known, but he started acting different. His personality changed. He seemed apathetic. He didn't seem to have the passion that he had anymore. And we thought he was reacting to our mother being ill. And then we found out he was diagnosed with front temporal dementia, which is 4% of those with dementia have this awful disease. And it changed his personality, and it affects your front temporal lobe. And so we didn't have either parent. You lost yours as teenagers. We lost ours both about the same time later on in life. We were fortunate to have it that long, but we had a mom in a wheelchair and a father that was struggling with dementia when his whole life had exercised his body and his mind. And then this disease happened. It can affect anybody. And we realized that he was living in Crescendo until he couldn't do it anymore. He did it and kind of faked it probably as long as he could. And then finally he succumbed to it. So that was a hard thing for us. And we rallied together and we relied on each other and our faith and what we had been taught from our parents to get through this hard time. And then if that wasn't enough, 2 months later, my brother's daughter, Rachel, passed away from effects of depression 2 months after my father passed. And that was devastating for us. She was the oldest girl of 8 children. And my brother and sister-in-law and all of us were so devastated by this great loss. And my brother, thinking about it, said, someone told him, you'll always have a hole in your heart. And he thought, you know what? That's not right. I'm going to make a muscle where that hole is. I'm going to make a muscle. He realized this can either destroy us, it can define us, or it can strengthen us. And he chose to let this strengthen their family and strengthen our entire family. He and Sean and Rebecca started a foundation called Bridle Up Hope, which their daughter loved horses. It gave her great happiness and pleasure to ride horses. And it helped some of her friends when they were depressed to go horseback riding with her. And so they started this nonprofit foundation that takes in young girls from 12 to 18 and teaches them to ride horses, equestrian training, and also couples that with some life skills. My brother Sean took my dad's 7 habits and wrote 7 habits of highly effective teens, applied all of this to the teenage stage. And then the third component is service. With over 1,000 girls have gone through Bridle Up Hope that since Rachel passed away 10 years ago. Rachel isn't with them now. They believe that they'll be with her later, but she's not there now, but they can choose to make a difference in the lives of girls that struggle with anxiety, depression, abuse, suicide, trauma, and change their life. And it has been life-changing for many of these 1,000 girls that have gone through the program. So that was our personal journey that I shared in Crescendo, in part because we have empathy for others. Some have gone through much worse things than those. Yeah. Some don't have family support like we did, having 9 siblings that could depend on each other. We know others are suffered even greater, but that was our journey and our attempt to live in Crescendo despite what life throws at you.
And such a powerful way to going off on the ending of this book, even though it's not a diminuendo, it is still a crescendo of taking the experiences that we've dealt with, whether positive or tragedies. The theme here is about service to others. The more we're able to do for others, the stronger we become ourselves.
That's right. My father taught that contribution is more important than accumulation, and that contributing to others' lives through all these stages, the midlife stage where you don't realize if you're successful or not and you're struggling, the pinnacle of success where you have had great success in your life. You've been like a Jimmy Carter, who was the president of the United States, but yet his greatest work was still ahead of him. He's the best post-president we've ever had. People wouldn't rate him very high in his presidency, but his greatest work was still ahead of him, which is his humanitarian work. And then the life-changing setbacks that we've discussed. And then the last part, the second half of life. Some people think, well, I'm 75. I don't have a lot of money. What can I do to make a difference? This example in the book, a poverty advocate, a homeless advocate said to this woman, could you donate 1 can of soup a week? And she said, yes, I could do that. She said, imagine a single mother opening up that can of soup and feeding her family. They go to bed without being hungry that night. If you can contribute that's an awesome contribution. She did that for several years, and hundreds of meals were supplied by this one woman. Contribution is the most important thing that we can do that will help other people wherever they're at. But in the same time, it saves us. it blesses our lives because we bring a light to other people. And back to that quote that by Picasso, the meaning of life is to find your gift, and the purpose of life is to give it away. And so I believe that contribution, like it says in the subtitle, your most important work is always ahead of you, meaning you don't know if you're finished contributing. You may be older, you may be going through a divorce, you may be bankrupt right now, you may be struggling in a bad relationship. Use your R&I. Do what you can to expand your circle of influence. You still have a lot to contribute in your life if you believe it and act on it.
And also, we don't know when the second half of our life is really in terms of what age we'll be at. And that's what again, as I was reading that and that what I mentioned in the beginning was to say that even if the second half of your life is in your 70s and you're in your 30s right now, I think there's still so much value of being able to look and say, there's so much that I have to throughout my life to be preparing for.
That's exactly right. A quote that we were raised on is the best way to predict your future is to create it. Create it ahead of living it. This is the future that I want. These are my goals. I've got these setbacks and these difficulties, but so what? I can overcome them. I can expand my circle of influence and work hard to attain these goals. I had to do that writing the book. And I know that most of your listeners are struggling with far worse, far harder things. But we wanted to inspire people to have hope that they still do have important things ahead of them, and their greatest contribution may still be to come. You don't know when that is.
Thank you with that. As we sort of wrap things up here, Cynthia, is there one thing that you'd hope people take away from this book?
Our main goal was to help them. I talked earlier about life is a mission, not a career. My father always believed that you don't invent your missions, you detect them. This is something Viktor Frankl taught. You detect your own mission. So you deeply think to yourself, what is it that I could contribute to those around me, in my family, in my neighborhood? See a need. And with your unique skills and talents, reach it. Do what you can to make a difference in someone's life. And you just start. Think today, who needs me? Who needs what I have to offer? Because every person does have a unique mission. And it's usually the greatest enjoyment that you have is by helping other people. And so I would say, look around, see a need, and respond. Theodore Roosevelt said, do what you can, where you are, with what you have. So you have enough to make a difference in someone's life if you will just respond.
Fully agree. Thank you so much for this opportunity to talk about this book before it's launched. I'm so excited to see where this goes, the impact that this can have on so many people.
Thanks so much, Patrick. I've enjoyed speaking with you, and you live in Crescendo yourself. I love hearing your example of growing up, and the things that you're doing now is a great mission of service, I believe.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wishing you the best. Peace.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Learning from Leaders podcast. If you've enjoyed the show, please feel free to rate, review, and subscribe on your preferred podcast listening platform. We really appreciate that effort. Until next time, keep rising above your best as a leader.